There you go. We see the little numbers going up. We'll give it a second to let our counter go up. Ew, oh my goodness. Y'all are popular.
Oh, don't.
All right, we will get started and let people come in as they will. We are already at 202 people. Wow. Welcome everybody to our Social Workers Confronting Racial Injustice Conference. I'm Bethany Matson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm happy you all are here for this breakout presentation, which we have titled Dane County Department of Human Services mandated shifting the mindset on mandated reporting. I should have known that. I again am Bethany. I am a Black, bald, well, low fade, blondish Black woman. I won't say my age, wearing gold glasses, gold hoop earrings, and a gold nose ring, and a burnt orange lipstick with a bright yellow, a la Big Bird yellow sweater. And I'm really happy to welcome you all to this session. We are providing live captioning and CART services, which are, you can see the captioning if you click on the caption button. And this recording, like all of our recordings for this conference, will be available on our conference website later today, maybe, but they will definitely be available once the conference has ended. And so before I introduce our speakers, just a few Zoom info items. To access this presentation, you are required to provide your name and email. This allows us to log our attendees and email you information on CEUs for this presentation, which will be distributed via email at a later date. Your cameras and microphones will remain muted. We do have the Q&A feature, which you can submit questions for our presenters, and they will track those as the presentation goes along. Please know that due to the large number of attendees, we may not be able to get to all the questions, but they will try. I'm putting that on the presenters, they'll try. So it is a pleasure for me to introduce our speakers. I've known both of them since I was a baby social worker, as I say. So I'm happy they're here today to do this presentation. First, I want to welcome Tess, the French lady with the French last name, DuChateau. Good. So Tess is an access social worker for Dane County Department of Human Services for 11 years, sharing her master's of social work degree from UW-Madison, and is a graduate of the Title IV Child Welfare Training Program. Tess has been giving this presentation to various community providers and other Wisconsin CPS agencies since August 2021, including at the 2022 Public Child Welfare Conference. She is actively working with agencies to implement structural change to reporting requirements to further the goals of mandated supporting. And our next presenter is Lisa Martin. Lisa Martin is a CPS Initial Assessment Supervisor for Dane County Department of Human Services. She has worked in the field of child protection for 35 years, 5 years in Oklahoma, and 30 plus years in Dane County. Lisa has been a CPS supervisor in initial assessment for 21 years. Lisa has been training for the Wisconsin Child Welfare Professional Development System, the professional development for social workers throughout the state of Wisconsin for 22 years. She has trained or is training in the areas of sexual abuse interviewing in child welfare, initial assessment, access, and ethics and boundaries. Lisa was an initial assessment peer reviewer for the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families Continuous Quality Review Program during the initial assessment review period that occurred in 2019 through 2022, completing over 90 reviews of initial assessments completed throughout the state. So again, I want to welcome you all to shifting the mindset on mandated reporting, and also just acknowledge that our plenary speakers spoke about mandated reporting, and this is a great follow-up if that is what brought you here, to talk about the ways in which we shift the mindset of mandated reporting in this time where there are movements to abolish the practice or change the practice. This is a great approach to how we think of mandated supporting and really working towards supporting our community rather than seeking ways to involve more folks into various systems. So I'll pass it on to Tess and Lisa.
Well, Bethany said it all. We can all go home now. She summarized the training. My name is Tess DuChateau. I'm so excited to be here. And I am a white 36-year-old woman, short brown hair, wearing a flower top with a white cardigan. And I have various children decorations behind me that my children have made. So welcome. I'm glad you're here.
And I'm Lisa Martin. So glad everyone is here. I am going to be rocking my 60s. I'm embracing them in a couple of months. So I'm going to be hitting the 60s crowd. I have brown hair. I decided today to jazz you with my new sweater that is white and black. And I go by he or she and her pronouns. And Tess is going to start us off. I also have to start by saying I will be running the PowerPoint. I'm looking at 3 screens, and there might be a time or two that I lose my mouse, but I'll try my best to keep up with everybody. Take it, Tess.
Thank you. I might say next slide to Lisa. I'm just asking you to go on the next slide because she has PowerPoint. And if you see me kind of looking up to the right, I'm just looking at my notes. So welcome, everyone. We just want to go over some training objectives with you. And also, we just want to acknowledge that this is likely new information or a different perspective of the CPS system than you've been previously informed about. We are not only taking on preconceived notions about the child welfare system, but we're also addressing implicit bias. Sometimes these conversations can be uncomfortable and a different lens than what is someone's current position. There's a lot of new information to take in. It can be overwhelming. We invite you to take small sips of the information and ask questions as we go. All right, our training objectives include understanding Chapter 48 definitions of maltreatment. That's our children's code in Wisconsin. Understand the child welfare system and when in the process when CPS is contacted. Understand the information needed when making a CPS report and committing to providing all that information. Apply critical thinking and analyze the situation to see if a report needs to be made or if the family's needs might be better met through a community resource. Understand the power differential and how invasive a CPS investigation is. Be aware of themes of race, oppression, power, and privilege, and how that impacts who's reported to CPS and how that plays out throughout our system. Participate in the Wisconsin child welfare transformation and how that applies to mandated reporting. We're going to be covering all this today, but if at the end you feel like, Lisa and Tess, you didn't cover that, please let us know, and I want to make sure we address that. All right, you can go on to the first slide, and Alicia, you can do our first poll. I'll read the question and then please answer if you can. What message have you been given about mandated reporting in the past? A, see something, say something. B, when in doubt, call CPS. After a certain number of reports, CPS will open a case or critically analyze info utilizing reasonable cause in the statutes. Just give the polls a minute. All right. Alicia, I don't know if you want to give the polls another second, or if you see that most people have answered, you can close the poll and launch the results. All right. The majority of you said when in doubt, call CPS, and followed by see something, say something, and then the smallest percent answered D. I hope as we finish out this training, you will all say that moving forward, it's going to be answer D. But I'm sure the other messages have been given in the past. There's been mixed messages about what we've told mandate reporters, including at our own agency. And we're really hoping today that we can give you a new message. You can go on to the next slide. This is a graphic from Wisconsin DCF Child Welfare Transformation presentation. I know there's a lot going on in this photo, but let me kind of break it down for you. So this picture shows what we are aiming for in a community approach to raise up families in order to keep children safe at home. On the bottom right, you see the ambulance, police, school bus. Those are all of our community providers responding. They're help creating the foundation, that bridge for the families. One big takeaway here is everyone working together, families, service providers, and CPS professionals. The second takeaway is the dam holding back that flood that's kind of in the top right, left corner. I like to think of that flood as the potential emergencies, the crises, the phone calls to access. We're keeping those away because we have this community approach, everyone helping, everyone creating this social net for the family. I also want you to know that this approach to mandated reporting is not just Dane County. It's being encouraged for all Wisconsin counties by DCFS as part of their transformation. It's also being used on a national scale. Arizona, Georgia, Nebraska, and Vermont all utilize mandated supporting. Several states have community providers advocating for mandated reporting reform at a grassroots level, family first legislations for rethinking mandated reporting. And this training is Dane County's response to that. You can go on to the next slide. All right, a quick overview of the CPS system in case some of you are not familiar. We started access, we open cases, we don't open cases, then it goes to initial assessment, then ongoing. I know there's probably terms on here that you don't really know or are not familiar with. We will explain all these terms by the end of the presentation. The important thing that I want you to understand about the CPS process is that access, that's where I am at. I'm an access social worker. That's the foundation of the child welfare system. Most of you as mandated reporters may only have contact with CPS at access. It's a common misconception that mandated reporters are outside the child welfare system. You make a call and that's it, but that's simply just not true. As a mandated reporter, you are part of the child welfare system. You help create the foundation with access. You can go on to the next slide, Lisa. All right, we're going to have several statistics throughout this presentation, and this is our first one. Out of the gate, I just want to highlight the why our agency started doing this and the urgency of what we're all doing. Everyone here represents multiple systems working together to ensure children in our community are safe. But we also must remember that the systems present have caused irreparable harm to communities. We are presenting an anti-racist framework and asking you all to be a part of it. We are asking you to engage with us in structural change and a paradigm shift. If we all want to move towards anti-racist work, we must understand the why, which will get us to the how. We are going to encourage you to question yourself at every decision-making point you have, just as we're asking our own staff, including supervisors, to do. The first people that we did this presentation for was Dane County Human Services staff. All right, now the statistics. So this is a snapshot of what the last 2 years have looked like at Dane County Human Services specifically. We received over 8,000 reports and screened in about 20% of them. You'll see we completed over 1,600 investigations. Of those investigations, 314 were substantiated for abuse and neglect, which is about 18.6% total of screened in reports. Those were substantiated. And substantiated means is that we found that there was evidence that child abuse and neglect occurred. So of the 8,000 calls made to our department, only 3.8% of them were found out to be true, that a child was abused or neglected. In the kind of left side there, neglect is by far the most reported type of abuse. If you hone in on the reporter relationship, that's dead center. You'll see the DA's office and law enforcement is our #1 reporter, followed by educational professionals. These are pretty much our top 2 reporters. Maybe educational professionals was larger pre-pandemic. But our top 5 reporters are pretty solid. So why is it so important to understand the role of a mandated reporter? I always think history is the best way to understand what you're doing now. So I'm going to give you a little history lesson. So 1960s, that's when mandated reporting laws went into effect. The focus was primarily on healthcare workers, and they only had to report physical abuse. Legislators were told that this was only going to impact a small number of children. These children were hidden. The only way that CPS would know about these kids is if professionals had to make a report about them. In 1974, CAPTA was passed, and that it pretty much expanded the child welfare system in terms of mandated reporting as we have it now. All the other professions were added. It also, that's when other forms of abuse were added: emotional abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, sexual abuse. So when it was expanded, no one really did research to know if this system was going to work or not. Well, we have research now. We have information that the system has completely backfired and completely overloaded the system. A small number of cases are true, but due to the overwhelming amount, it's just hard to find those needles in the haystack, or the 3.8% of substantiated cases. You go on to next slide. Thank you. All right. So the statute that creates it all, the mandated reporting statute. Feel free to read the statute. I want you to take particular note of the bolded words: reasonable cause to suspect, and in the course of your professional duties. So what is reasonable cause? That is a suspicion that a reasonable person would have based on known information and circumstances. That's based on evidence of specific and articulable facts. That's more than a hunch, but less than proof. Reasonable cause also is going to be different based on your profession. A kindergarten teacher who sees a kid every day is going to have a way higher level of information compared to a police officer at 2 a.m. So when you might have a suspicion about child abuse, you have to think if you have reasonable cause, and if reasonable cause is going to meet the statutes of how they are listed for sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, etc. So if you're associating wanting to call based on feelings, a hunch, a gut feeling, that's making a report based on bias, not information that you need to meet reasonable cause. We're going to be talking about reasonable cause throughout this training, so much so that you're going to be like, I get it, stop. But I just want you to make a mental note now. It's a very important term, and keep this in mind while we move on to the statutes. All right, take it away, Lisa.
All right, whoops. Sorry about that. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the types of maltreatment and the legal decisions. Definitions. These are the Chapter 48 statutory definitions of abuse. So it's what the state legislature has decided needs to be met in order for CPS to intervene in the family. If what is being reported to us does not meet this definition, or if significant safety issues are not present, our agency legally cannot intervene on a family situation. Each state has their own definition, and some are more strict than others. So let's go ahead and put up our second poll. Whoops. And there you go. Okay, so it's a pretty easy one, so maybe we can post the results. Okay. All right, no, most of you said no. So let's see what the definition is. So we can take down the results. All right, so I'm going to let you go ahead and read this slide. This is the Chapter 48 statutory definition of physical abuse. With regards to physical abuse, you'll notice that this is a very high bar, that it really requires a child to have not just an injury, but a severe injury. Additionally, the way it is written, it lends itself to subjectability. What is severe? What is frequent? How do you know if a child has an internal injury? As Tess had said before, we always kind of use the reasonable person standard. Would more people think than not that it meets the definition of severity or frequency? For example, we might argue about whether or not once a month is frequent, but I think we all would agree 3 times a week would be frequent. So we kind of use that reasonable person standard. So how do you articulate this information over the phone? You'll get a lot of questions from our access workers to really try to understand how the injury is presenting. The size, the shape, the color, the location, all those are important descriptors for us to decide whether or not it meets this definition. Sending a picture to us is a great useful tool, although we understand that this might be against agency policy. So if you're able, you can have the child with the injury might go to the school nurse or see their primary doctor. These people can look over more sensitive areas on the child, and many of them are trained to being able to measure or describe the injury. Otherwise, we ask that you slow down, take a good mental note of what the injury looks like and what words you're going to use to describe it. It's very helpful to compare it to an everyday object like the size of a quarter, if it has any linear presentation or if there's a pattern to it. Use your observation skills. Does it look like it's from a belt? Does it look like it's from a phone charger? You don't have to know. It's just your observation skills to take a note so that you can describe it to us. Severity of injury, though, is somewhat dependent on age. So a non-mobile infant should not have injuries regardless. And we elevate those reports when they come in as more serious, even if it might be a minor injury. While it's not uncommon for 2-year-olds to have multiple minor injury. And again, in order to meet that definition, we have to decide whether or not it's by other than accidental means, which is why it's so important for us to know the context of how the injury occurred. We often get reports of a child saying to someone, please don't call home, I'm going to get it, implying that they might be physically disciplined. We're not able to do a whole lot with that, given that the maltreatment hasn't happened and thus probably doesn't fit the definition. In those cases, it might be best for you as the adult to help the child develop some sort of plan about who they can call, where they can go, or maybe even checking in with them the next day. We know the use of physical discipline can result in negative outcomes for children. Child protection certainly does not condone any type of physical discipline, but this is better addressed by prevention efforts in the community, not by CPS.
We just have a couple of questions in the Q&A.
Okay.
Physical abuse. I thought you might want to answer them now.
Okay, let me see. Go ahead. Can you read them?
Yep, I was going to read them for you. The first
Okay.
one, does absence of injury mean only physical injury?
Does absence of injury mean only physical injury?
Yes.
So if there is no injury, but the information that you have might suggest an internal injury, then that might be reportable. For instance, if a child is describing being punched multiple times in their stomach, there might not be an external injury, but the context of which that might have happened, there might be an internal injury. I hope that answered that question.
Next question is, I think you already answered it, but what if you believe in corporal punishment?
It still has to meet the definition of maltreatment. Corporal punishment in and of itself is not considered physical abuse.
Okay. And then physical discipline often injures a child intentionally. How does that scale with the chapter 48.021A?
It still has to meet that it is, it's a serious physical injury that includes, but is not limited. It's the same thing: lacerations, fractured bones, internal injuries, severe and or frequent injuries. or great bodily harm. So it still has to create an injury.
That's it. Keep
Okay,
going.
thank you. Keep going, move along, move along. Okay, so most of reports made to CPS are for neglect, and it covers a wide range of concerns. It's the majority of the reports that we screened in, and the main reason children are removed from their home. So reports made for neglect can have major consequences for families. I'm going to go ahead and let you read that definition. So the highlights in this definition are that the information has to seriously endanger the physical health of the child. This is often a conversation that we have internally when reading a report. We need to be able to say the incident that occurred places the child at great risk of physical harm, which is a high bar to prove or take legal action on. We'll talk about more examples of this as we go through. Another highlight is for reasons other than poverty. This can be very challenging to tease out. The line between poverty and neglect is blurred, right? So as poverty may exacerbate other risk factors for child maltreatment. Our access staff may ask you specifically how a child is impacted by the parent's behavior. Is it a failure, refusal, or inability to perform or provide certain care? And again, this can depend on the child's age and functioning. Here's some examples. Children being left home alone. The age of the child is important. There's certain ages that are clear, 6 and under, that children should not be left alone. Other ages aren't so. So when you're thinking about that, think about the age of the child, the caregiving of younger siblings, the amount of time that they're left alone. Where is the parent? What's the developmental level of the person who's home alone? Every 11-year-old isn't every 11-year-old. What is this? Was this a circumstantial situation, or has it occurred multiple times? Children coming to school wearing the same clothes for the whole week, struggling with hygiene or toilet issues. It's really hard to say that these circumstances would place the child at serious risk of physical harm, although they may pull on our heartstrings, right? These are those sad cases. Lack of medical care. Thing to think about here is routine versus a known medical condition. That can have a significant impact on the child's health if the parent isn't addressing it. While routine care, preventative care is good for kids and healthy for kids, it's not likely to result in severe harm. Parental drug use. This is a big one. Age of the child and what the care of the child is that they are not receiving. We need more information than a mom is using heroin around her 3-year-old. We need to know about the mom's functioning and what does that really mean for that 3-year-old. Parent being arrested for OWI with their child in the car. This is an area where our thinking here has really evolved. We know racial profiling is a very real issue in our community, and we know people are pulled over for poverty-related reasons daily, broken tail light, expired plates, things like that. So while it's helpful to know that the parent was over the legal limit, what we're going to want to know is if they were driving in a way so as to seriously endanger the health of their child. Were they swerving? Did they hit a curve? Were they in an accident? Were they driving at a high rate of speed? For domestic violence, children witnessing domestic violence is not in and of itself neglect. And again, we're not saying that's a good thing, but when it goes over the line is when a child is targeted, if they're injured during a domestic incident, or they tried to intervene. Wisconsin doesn't have an educational neglect statute, and so a child missing school doesn't meet our definition of neglect. So talking to your truancy liaison is the best way to address those concerns. The other thing is threat of harm or unsafe conditions are present. So there's example, in other words, nothing has happened yet, but a reasonable person would agree that conditions are such that something might result in significant harm to a child. So for example, going back to the domestic violence, if a weapon was used, if a gun was shot off in the home. It just is by chance that the child was not injured, but they very likely could have been. Going back to the heroin example, if you have information that the mom is using heroin and she became unconscious and her friend just happened to walk in the home. So the child was not harmed, but it's just by chance that the other adult came into the home and therefore the child was not harmed. The next category is sexual
Lisa?
abuse. Yes.
So there's a couple of questions on neglect that I was going to share with you. Okay. So we often hear teachers / counselors say that we should call CPS because a parent won't take their kid to get mental health support when they are time again suicidal. Where does this fall into neglect?
So it depends, which is hard to hear. So the question is, why is the parent not providing the mental health services? And is that child clearly suicidal? So we do take some reports like that. So if it's clear that the parent is simply not addressing it, doesn't believe it, thinks the child is attention seeking, and you as a professional really believe that this child is at imminent risk of harm due to their own suicidal thoughts, that would be reportable.
Right, next question. Do you think that CPS workers misinterpret poverty as neglect? And if so, how widespread do you think that misinterpretation is among CPS?
That is a question for a whole breakout session in itself. I think that we have to be really litigious within ourselves about sorting that out. And that certainly can play into people's bias, and our own implicit bias and our own feelings about what we think kids should have. So that comes in the dialogue that happens between supervisors and workers as they're addressing those.
Two more. How does your agency handle situations in which, because of poverty, a family neglects medical care for a child facing a life-threatening illness?
So in that situation, again, it could depend on why. We now have something that's called targeted safety services, which if it's truly a funding issue for the parent and it's a problem for safety that will result in significant harm to that child, we can have a plan with the family that's an in-home safety plan that can access some funding to get some of those medical needs met. That might be helping the family get Badger care or get some kind of medical coverage for them, depending upon, like, some people don't know that exists for them and Badger care could cover it. It might have to do with transportation. And so those are some of the things that we also ask at Access prior to us screening a report, if some of those services or conversations have been had with parents.
And last one, how do you navigate withholding medication for mental health, such as ADHD or other?
So again, what it has to result in is severe physical harm to a child, right? So withholding an ADHD medicine might help them perform better in school, might keep them be able to concentrate, but is it going to cause severe harm to that child, physical harm, if they're not provided that medication? So I would say the answer to that is not a case that we would open in Dane County.
Okay, keep going.
Okay, sexual abuse. Okay. So you can go ahead and look over that. We're not going to go over every point of the slide. The important thing to know is that this is the one that's most similar with the criminal statute. So Access staff will want to know certain things that will decide how quickly we're going to respond. They want to know the maltreator's relationship to the child, their accessibility, is the person residing in the home or someone that the child is going to see frequently. What did the child report? Get specifics. Did they actually say sexual assault or sexual abuse, or is that a term that you're using to describe what they said? So what the child said, specific to what they mean. We don't want to overreact or underreact based on our own assumptions of what different terms mean to different age youth. Think about if you have assumptions on what different terms mean about reasonable cause to suspect. Do you have evidence? Is it specific? Can you articulate it? It's not just a hunch. So like if a child says, I don't like how he was touching me, this isn't specific enough to state that that's just sexual abuse. We would ask that you ask a few more follow-up questions. Simple question to that would be, what do you mean? Who was this? Does anyone else know? We also recently started coordinating with law enforcement on investigating sex trafficking cases. We used to think that children with sexualized behaviors were likely victims of sexual assault, but we don't think that anymore, given how readily accessible this sexual content is through social media and the knowledge base of kids. So sexualized behavior alone are not indicative of sexual abuse. Okay. You can go ahead. This is the emotional abuse. You can go ahead and read that definition. So as you can see, this is a really technical definition, which means it's very difficult to prove. It's the least reported type of abuse and is rarely substantiated around the states. Highlights in this definition are it has to be harm to a child's psychological or intellectual functioning exhibited to a severe degree. So it can't just be a diagnosis of anxiety or depression. It needs to be significant, and for reasons other than poverty. The parent isn't taking steps to ameliorate the symptoms, and it's not within the normal range for the child's age and stage of development. It's really hard to draw a straight line from a parent's behavior to the child's mental health without ruling everything else out. Also, we have to have a clinician willing to testify to all these different pieces of this definition. The only time in my tenure I have seen this substantiated was when we had a teen who identified as being gay, and he just wasn't, that his mother wasn't supportive. She was actively berating him, actively telling him to harm himself, telling him he didn't deserve to be on this earth and that he should kill himself. And the child was acting out on this and was suicidal, and his mother was not taking any steps to ameliorate that. When we think back to reasonable cause, make sure you're reporting based on known information and not how you think a child should be treated or talked to. The last one is unborn child abuse. Again, I'll give you a second to read that.
Would you mind reading it aloud just so that it's a little more accessible for everyone?
Oh, okay. Yes, I will. So when used in referring to an unborn child, serious physical harm inflicted on the unborn child and the risk of serious physical harm to the child when born caused by the habitual lack of self-control of the expectant mother of the unborn child in the use of alcohol beverages, controlled substances, or controlled substance analogs exhibited to a severe degree. This statute is in a bit conflict with whether or not mandated reporter laws applies to this. These reports usually come from medical staff, and they need to have the three elements that are in italics: serious physical harm, habitual lack of self-control, and exhibited to a severe degree. It's difficult to get a doctor to say serious harm was inflicted onto the unborn child as a direct result of the mother's drug use. This only has to do with substance abuse. This is not about DV, and it's not about lack of prenatal care. Child protection does not have the resources to hold expected mother, and there's a lot of legal questions around our authority to do so. There have been occasions where there is a Chapter 51 commitment where a mother is held, but we really don't see that too often either. So you suspect maltreatment. Now what? So first, we want you to slow down, take a breath, and think about the information you have in front of you. You might have heard possibly an incredibly scary incident from a child. The child might have an injury, you might have feelings of your own, and your mind is always trying to process this information and help the child. Taking a deep breath if you are looking at injuries, making a note of what they look like we talked before, size, shape, color. Sometimes in situations, the injury can seem bigger and different as you're hearing a story than what the injury actually looks like in real life, because you yourself are processing your own trauma. The next question to ask is, does this meet reasonable cause and the definition of abuse and neglect? If you're not sure, you could ask questions 1 and 2. Tell me more. What happened next? We want to focus on the 4 W questions: who, what, where, and when. Let's take a look at what that really means to ask more questions. So often service providers get a little bit anxious about what this means. It's like, you want us to interview kids? That's your job. This is partially our fault. And the reason it's our fault is for a long time, we told people not to ask kids questions. That's our job. While it's partially true, this advice has kind of backfired on us. And we found if reporters get a little more information, we actually make a lot better decisions. Also, we're not asking you to do a formal interview. We just want you to gather a couple of questions. There's a difference between interviewing and information gathering. A formal interview by Child Protection is when you have a trained interviewer. So we're trained to interview kids. We teach kids about the interview process, what we're going to expect and modeling to them. And that interview might be recorded. Information gathering is just a couple of questions to determine if you have reasonable cause. Things to keep in mind: staying neutral could help how a child processes or opens up with the initial assessment social worker if there is one assigned. It's also important to keep in mind a case might not be opened, and your message about the process could impact how the child or children interact with CPS in the future. So a couple other things, now that the information is all in front of you, and you believe that you have reasonable cause, there's 2 more things to think about. One is, does the child need immediate medical care? If the child needs immediate medical care, take care of that first before you call us and make a report, because that's the most important, the child's safety and their health and well-being. Who do you call? As a mandated reporter, you can call law enforcement or CPS. You will meet your mandate either way, but remember that law enforcement has to respond to every call that they get, and CPS has discretion in screening out a report, and we'll talk about why that's important in a little bit. So, Tess.
All right,
Give it to you.
Thank you. So now you're actually going to call us. What does that mean? What does that look like? On the slide, we have listed our phone number for during the week, office hours, and then on our evenings and weekend and holidays, we have our EPS, or emergency protective social worker. It's one social worker for 12 or 14-hour shift, handling all the calls for the county. So please be kind. It's one person. And then information to have when calling. We want basic demographic information. We want what happened, parental knowledge, description of injury, information about child and parent functioning, and protective factor. I know that sounds like a lot of information that we're asking. They are required questions for state and federal standards, but we also are just trying to really make a good assessment about everything we know to make the best informed decision. We also ask about if there's any Native American heritage, and then information we already have that we might consider. CCAP, that's referring to Wisconsin Circuit Court access. We look up criminal history. We also see if there's a sex offender living in the home. And then we look at past CPS history on every report. We're looking for patterns or information that might mitigate safety concerns. So I wanted to make sure I read everything on the slide first. So things that I want you to keep in mind when you call in is making a report could take anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes. It pretty much depends on the intensity of the case and the amount of information. We ask a lot of information. Please be kind to access workers when you call in. They take multiple phone calls back to back. They're constantly writing, analyzing information. They have very limited time to process it all in one day. People who receive the information firsthand are the true mandated reporters in that sense, and they should be the ones making a report. Someone else making the report for you does not release your mandate. It is really best to also make reports not while you're on speakerphone. It's incredibly difficult to hear, and we have to document who says what for each call. The reason why the first person needs to call and not the second person, sometimes I take reports from nurses who are just reading off of, my chart, what a doctor got during a disclosure, and that can really have some insufficient information about what the child said, what's the safety concern. We don't want to hear just about the negative or the crisis. We want to hear about the good things too. These are called protective factors that can really mitigate any safety concerns and give us information about just how the family handles crises and highlights the good parenting techniques as well. Research studies show that these common sense notions, when they're well established in a family, reduce the likelihood of child abuse and neglected.
Tess, we have a
Yep.
question in
Okay.
the Q&A. Says, what support do CPS staff receive to help decrease burnout? I've had several interactions with calling access workers, and they have not been the most welcoming and have actually told me I should not be calling them regarding my concerns.
Oh, sorry about that. To decrease burnout at Dane County Human Services Access, I would say that we have a very strong unit. We constantly can call each other if we want to be a sounding board. We can access our supervisors to consult. Laughter, honestly, is the best medicine at Access. We try to find humor in the little things of the day because we hear such heavy things that we unfortunately sometimes carry with us that we don't even realize it. I would say that sometimes it is really hard to manage it all. I could take 3 phone calls back to back, each one 20 minutes, and go on to the next one without a blink of an eye. So it's very much, you're hearing a lot of information, you're hearing about a lot of trauma, and that's just kind of the nature of the game. But we have a really strong staff that help us with that. In terms of, someone having a bad day and maybe not being the most welcoming, like I said, I do apologize. We do the best that we can, and I just try to give everyone grace in those situations and just write it off as a bad day. Okay. We want you to be mindful of the words that you use when you call in and describe a family or a condition. These often are called buzzwords that can lead to implicit bias for a family unintentionally. So, for example, someone calling in a dirty home. What does dirty really mean? Dirty to me, pre-children, it's very different now that I have 2 children under 5. There's spaghetti on the walls and I didn't make spaghetti. I don't know how it got there. I think that, we will ask a lot of questions about what dirty is. We're not trying to put someone on spot about, what we're just really trying to understand what you mean. What did you see? And what's the safety concern about it? And the reason why I'm saying to be so careful about the words that you use is that research shows that buzzwords often stick with a family for the life of a case, even if it's an offhand comment or that's made several years prior. CPS is not the only one who has access to CPS records. Other systems may have access to our own records. They could read these buzzwords, and then that would automatically lead them to think negatively about a family, even though those allegations were found to be untrue years prior. The Native American.
Tess, we have another question for you.
Okay.
How do you all balance out utilizing CCAP and CCAPing a family and recognizing the racial disparities and undertones that come with CCAP and I'm sorry, I don't know what this means, but BIPOC community?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our state standards want us to document any felonies or misdemeanors. so I think we take into consideration, racial profiling and, that, someone could be charged with something and it could be true or not true, or that was just a situation, what they were going through at the time. We're really also trying to check our own preconceived notions when we're looking at this history. We're looking more for patterns of violence, if that makes any sense. So if I had a case about a father, having an OWI, but we had information that, the children, there was no concern from the reporter that there was, the children's basic needs were met. There was nothing else brought up. It's not like we would open that case then because this father had a past OWI. But maybe if the father had 7 OWIs and, the report was about the father possibly, driving intoxicated again, could we use that information to kind of look at the whole picture? Maybe, but it's also not like a final thing that said. It's more for information to know about that we may not have otherwise. One last thing I want to say about Native American heritage. People are often really mystified about why we ask about this. It is a federal and state requirement. And oftentimes we've heard from Wisconsin tribes that it's the best way for tribes to be notified of other possible members in the state. So if we don't open an access report, we have to send it to the tribe within 24 hours if they have a known member, and then they might do their own investigation or reach out to the family to offer services. All right, I can go on to the next slide. So if a report is screened in, there are 2 types of reports that could be opened with CPS. And the first one is a child protection report. We have a couple of response times. We have a couple of response times that we have that include same day, 24 to 48 hours, or 5 business days.
It's not being interactive for me, Tess.
Oh, okay. Well, and I'll just keep reading.
Okay.
So child services report means that we're going to investigate child abuse and neglect. Like I was saying, we have different response times. That's going to be dependent on the information that we get. There's 23 conditions that if we pick one of them, that means that we're going to have a same day response. If it was a 24 to 48 hour response, that means that one of the 11 conditions were picked. In terms of a same day, it's something that is happening right now, that if a government agency does not respond, then
it just kicked in. So there we go.
All right. Thanks, Lisa. So this is like a child, like with a black eye, that would obviously be really concerning when it requires same day response. 24 to 48 hour response. Maybe there was a domestic violence incident and the alleged maltreater is now at Dane County Jail. The family is safe. We don't have to respond the same day. We can respond the next day before the alleged maltreater gets out of jail. A 5-day, it meets the definition of abuse and neglect, but there's no identified safety concern. There's no immediate safety of the child that we can respond within 5 business days. Its initial assessment takes the screened in report. They investigate. Sometimes we close out the cases because the child is safe. There's no information that child was abused or neglected, or it could go on to juvenile court, and we would petition for CHIPS, child in need of protection or services. So then there's also a child welfare type of report that we could open. Child welfare report is assigned to make an offer of services to the family. This is completely voluntary. Families can decline our involvement. I want to make clear, though, that these services reports are for our agency to provide a service to a family that they can normally not access. So a child needs to be placed at an RCC, or a child needs to go to Northwest Passage for a 30-day evaluation. That's the type of service that a family can only access if there's a CPS case involved. A family needing to get connected to a therapist, we would not open that because anyone can access those resources in the community. And a child being currently suicidal, we wouldn't open it for that reason. We're not we're not trained mental health providers. Your local Journey mental health crisis, agency should be contacted instead. All right, moving on to the next slide. Yes. Yes. Okay, if a report is screened out, it did not meet the definition of child abuse and neglect, which means that we cannot legally make contact with the family. And this is really sometimes confusing to people. Oftentimes people make reports because they want to connect the family to services, but if it doesn't meet the legal definitions, like Lisa just went over, then we cannot make any legal contact with them. It could also mean that more than one report was made about the incident. We opened the other person's report, but you got a screened out letter because your report was not open, but someone else's was. It also can mean that a report is forwarded to law enforcement. In non-caregiver sexual abuse cases, that means that we don't have the ability to investigate. They are automatically sent to law enforcement. I talk about this multiple times a day with different providers of when they call in sexual abuse. I always ask, did you call the parent? A lot of times they say no. I say, you really need to call the parent because I know we're not going to open this. And then all of a sudden a law enforcement officer is going to pop up at their door, and that will be incredibly traumatic, especially for a sexual abuse victim. So I oftentimes recommend when there's sexual abuse, non-caregiver concerns, to contact the parent, call with the parent to law enforcement to report it, because by calling us, you are calling law enforcement. And I think parents and children should have more authority and space to control that situation as much as they can. All right. I think that's it for that one. So many of you have been saying in the chat, when are you going to talk about mandated supporting? We are really getting close to it. I'm sorry if you've had to be patient, but that other information that we went over, we want to make a solid foundation about how the system works, what we actually do open before we can go on to mandated supporting. So we've talked about the why, we've gone over the definitions and the CPS process. We're going to shift our gears in talking about the how. How can we keep children in our community safe? Because it's not the sole responsibility of CPS. We are all playing a part of ensuring basic needs of children and families are being met. This is really why we coined the phrase of being a mandated supporter. And we're asking you to take additional steps in that process rather than just reporting what you hear. We're all asking you all to be brave and extend your thinking further. We want you to differentiate between harm and risk. Shifting our mindset. So a couple of the examples that they give, and this is from the Wisconsin DCF Child Welfare Transformation presentation. The system is broken and there's nothing I can do. And switching it to, I'm willing to step up and make an improvement. There's only time to put out the fire quickly and move on. Compared to, I'll spend time addressing the underlying issue with the family. And my favorite, I hear this all the time on the phone. The family is the problem. And I so wholeheartedly disagree. The family is not the problem. The family is our solution. And let it go on to Lisa.
Well, you're not going to get a scheduled break. Sorry, y'all. Tess, I've been trying to keep up with the questions by typing in the Q&A box, but I think there's one. At least I know that I didn't get to. So I don't know if you want to type anything in there. All right, so reflections. This is just a question that you just answer to yourself, and I want you to hold in your space as we present the next information. And that is, does racial bias influence reporting? So I want to show you some more statistics. So this is population by race in Dane County. It's 6 years of data. Population has been stable for the white and African-American population. The Hispanic population is fast growing in Dane County. So African-American children make up 10% of our population. Hispanic children make up 12%, and white children make up 70%. I really want you to keep this in mind over the next few slides regarding African-American children making up 10% of our population. So you see, since 2018, there has been a reduced number of referrals to CPS. This is not a bad thing, as less African-American children and parents have experienced system intervention, but African-American children continue to be referred at a rate that is 7 times higher than the rate of white children referred. So just how many children will be through the trauma of a CPS investigation? And it is true that when CPS is involved, no matter how great our intervention is, it does produce a trauma for the child. Just us being at people's doors produces a sense of power, trauma, because of the power that we hold, right? So in the United States, 53% of African-American children will experience an initial assessment within their lifetime. This is about 33% for all other races, which in and of itself is astonishingly high, all on its own. So that means 1/3 of the people on this Zoom call will have a report made against them at some point in their life, and even more likely if you're a person of color. This rate of disproportionality continues in the rate of out-of-home care based on referrals that are screened in. So the majority of children in out-of-home care continue to be our African-American children. This is the age group for 0 to 17. You can see at the bottom, this line, which is blue, represents children that are white, that has been stable over time, and the Hispanic population has gone up and down a little bit. This next graph kind of hones in on the younger children, age 0 to 11. Again, the white population has been pretty stable. We've done a little bit better with the Black population, African Americans, but they still are in care at a really disproportionate rate. So this graph shows that historically between 70 and 80% of CPS reports come from mandated reporters. Disproportionate reports are not being made by friends, relatives, someone else. They're made by all of us. We're the ones that are making them. So think back to our discussion about reasonable cause. This is a really low standard, and the training or information you received around a mandated reporting on the first poll we talked could be even lower, which is see something, say something. If you have a hunch, it's worth calling. We bring this up as this is where subjectivity in decision-making or making a report based on values and personal impact creep in and lead to disparities within our systems. And we get that these structures are built and they fester in our organizations as well. This isn't about 1 or 2 individuals. It's about your organization could be risk aversive. They might ask you to report based on opinion or just because, not because you have a reasonable cause to suspect. We're asking you today to challenge that and challenge your organization. When we started doing mandated reporting training, we first targeted our own agency actually, because we knew that we ourselves were making biased reports on families. Mandated reporting must have a focus, because if we want to affect racial inequities in our community to change, we have to contact those that are making the reports. Mandated reporting is not neutral. Okay, we found this website, mandated reporting is not neutral, about a year ago, and it really changed our view on our messaging. We used to think that we didn't have any control over the reports coming into our agency, that we had to act as customer service representatives, scribes of people's concerns, and make it a smooth, easy process for callers. We now see training the community around the legal definitions and reasonable cause is an essential role for access. So what can you do? Before making a CPS report, refer back to this document and back to the definitions and hold them up to see, is the information that you have actually meet the definition of one of the maltreatment categories? You can always, we tell our community folks, you can always call our access people to clarify definitions. They'll talk with you about those. Don't over-report. Be sure you're not reporting to ease your conscience or for CPS to document your concerns. We are not building a case against anybody. Often reporters call because they're concerned and don't know what else to do. And what they ultimately want is the family to get services. Most of our reports, as Tess talked over the reports we screened in, we never even contact a family, right? You're just creating a record for them. And even of those families that we are contacting and we do screen in for an assessment, they're not necessarily getting those services or provisions of services, and we're not following families if we don't find that maltreatment occurred or there's no safety concern. The community can access many of the services, almost every service we can outside of our intervention. Consider your implicit bias when you're reviewing the concerns and making a CPS report. Implicit bias includes racism, ageism, ableism, classism, sex orientation, and gender-based discrimination, among some of them. These could all impact someone's perceptions of the family. Consider your impact. Most mandated reporting trainings think that reporting to CPS is benign, but it's not. Reporting has real consequences for families. Our community takes mandated reporting seriously, but not necessarily at the cost of reporting and not at the cost of a family. It's no harm, it's not no harm, no foul. Parents might lose work. They might lose rent money. They might lose sleep. They might struggle with their mental health. Our intervention could cause a relapse because of the stress. The children might be less likely to speak to a safe adult in the future when they really need to. All of our information is in a statewide system. So if law enforcement or DA's office calls us and wants background information of a family, we're obligated to give that information to them. They use this information to consider whether a family will be formally charged or offered deferred prosecution, or even what kind of jail time they might get. Even if reports have not been screened in, there is a thought out there that if a family is even referred to CPS, there must be something there, right? So what could be the alternatives to this? So using your professional judgment, you're all professionals that are highly trained in skills. Use your knowledge to help and support a family. If your agency has a required mandate to report everything, advocate for change. Making a CPS report does not absolve you from intervention with the family. Reporting shouldn't be about your mandate. It needs to be about keeping kids in our community safe. We all hear information from kids that is alarming and uncomfortable. We are asking you to hold that information up to these definitions. And if they don't meet it, or you don't have a reasonable cause to suspect that the children are really unsafe, even though nothing bad has happened, we want you to walk towards the discomfort, sit with the information. It's okay not to tell anybody. I want you to be brave and have the courage to use this information to talk with coworkers and stand up for what's right after your worldview, alter your worldview around mandated reporting. It's the only way we're going to change the bias in our community. So this is a reflection on policy. We encourage you to begin a conversation about your own agency. We tend to primarily reflect on our own level of individual bias, which is good, but oftentimes it's about an organizational bias or culture and how it impacts the individual. There are agency rules dictating to people what we can and what you cannot do. People have to unwillingly follow a policy that has racial bias, which is complicated. And so the question is, do you have an agency policy that might be influencing racial disproportionality in your community? Or look at your policies and see if one may advertently be like that and make some changes within your own organization around that. While we also like to think about our observations from the COVID period, which has been quite influential. As you can see, the statistics on the right, and you may have heard about this in the news, with school closings and stay-at-home orders, reports to CPS were down in 2020, and boy, people were afraid. We were afraid that the economic and emotional toll of the pandemic was fueling a parallel hidden epidemic of child abuse. That was going to go, it was all going to go underground, right? But what we saw is our substantiation rate stayed the same, which means that we were catching the cases we needed to, and we weren't seeing as much of the fluff. If there was one thing we got out of the COVID-19 pandemic, is that increased reports or over surveillance doesn't necessarily mean our community is safer. Our community became safer as together we sought to help each other with compassion and assistance. There have been some really interesting studies from Columbia University around the child welfare system in New York City over the course of 2020 and 2021. Reports to CPS were almost down 50%. That happened across the county. It's just not a Wisconsin thing. It's not a Dane County thing. Juvenile and family courts saw a reduction in court filings, but they also saw a decrease in the number of children being seen in the ER for major trauma and child fatalities. And they did not see an increase in reports when the community started opening up again in 2020 and 2021. So they really questioned this regulation system that was built up prior to the pandemic and if it was really needed. We also saw during the pandemic was that there was an overwhelming response from the community wanting to help their neighbors or complete strangers. We saw government give out cash aids, COVID relief funds. It was a type of response that addressed poverty, that really made sure children in our community had their needs met and were safe. And so we took some of the things that we learned during COVID to apply them to how communities' response can really work to effectively provide safety for children and families. And so, do we have any questions? Are they all answered, Tess?
Oh, no, there's a bunch of them.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to keep up with them as best as possible. Okay, this is a sexual abuse one. Do you want to come back to it later since we're far away from sexual abuse?
Is it a quick one?
No. Okay. They want you to speak more on what maybe changed in 2007, 2008 at the beginning of the steady increase in reporting on Black children. Like, was there anything happening like locally or nationally that would explain that increase?
That is a really hard question. Wisconsin has, and Dane County in particularly, has had an awful rate in disproportionality of African-American families, both within contacts with law enforcement, interfacing with CPS, and then resulting crimes. I have my own opinions on what they might be, but they might not be informed enough to put them out there. So I have my suspicions, but I think that that's a big, and I apologize for saying this, a big subject matter that would take quite a bit of time to talk through. I think it has to do a lot with, at least in Dane County, a change in our legal partners' interpretation of what CPS could do, should do, and did not do, and became some oversight, at least for our county.
Okay, last one, and then I'll move on to slides. Can you speak to reporting when newborns are positive for substances?
Oh, boy, you guys are asking some really hard questions. Yes, I can. So there's an interesting thing that we just learned that just happened in our community, is that Meritor is stopping their process of testing umbilical cords and meconium because they believe that it causes more racial disparity in reporting, and are choosing instead to go with the maternal history and what they report and believing them, which is an amazing step. We just learned about that recently. What we look at in those cases is we open the cases that we have to, according to Act 79, which was a Wisconsin legislative act that went into effect, probably dating myself, but 8 to 9 years ago. And we're required to open some of those cases, but what we are really looking for is not whether or not they tested positive, but what kind of parental care is being provided or not being provided due to the maternal drug use.
Okay. I think the other questions will have to wait till the end, because I know we have 14 minutes. Okay. So where are we here? Yes. Okay. Last poll, Alicia, if you could pull it up. Is your agency ready to rethink mandator reporting? Rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 is least ready and 5 is most ready. I'll give you a second to do that. Okay, Alicia, if it looks like most have responded, please go ahead and launch it. All right, some said not at all. I feel like we got some 3s and some 4s and some 5s. I think that's great. I'm usually hoping for 3 and above because this is new material for a lot of people. All right, you can go on to the next slide, Lisa. My hope is to really talk about some concrete examples with mandated reporting that maybe will push you from a 3 to a 5. So that's my goal for the rest of the presentation. Mm-hmm. So when we want to change the narrative about mandated reporting, that means that you need to be a supporter and the preventative service to the family. I know some people were saying, well, how do you do that? What does that look like? The reason, just to give you the research says that most people who call in with their mandate, a small minority were really concerned about serious harm, and the majority wanted to connect people to resources. And then there's other people that just want to cover themselves legally. So imagine if that mandated reporting law was appealed. I know one person asked, do you think we should abolish CPS? I would just love to abolish mandated reporting laws because then if we got rid of the mandate, maybe people would just really be calling in about the kids who they're concerned. So if you've ever made a CPS report, I want you to think about the ones that you called. Were you concerned about child safety and serious harm, or were you just trying to connect them to the service, or were you just trying to cover yourself legally? You can kind of do a self-assessment there. So what can you do to help? 3 things that we often talk about is talking to families, reaching out, helping problem solve, and referring to community resources. So here are some examples: talking to families, reaching out, and this kind of came up with the physical abuse questions that happened too. So let's say that you learned of a kid being physically disciplined at home. There were no injuries. I think historically, most people would pick up the phone, call, because a kid shouldn't be hit. We know research-wise, kids should not be hit. Instead of picking up the phone to call us, I would suggest that you pick up the phone and talk to the parents about this. They may disagree with you, and they legally can physically discipline their kids, but I have often found that a lot of people just discipline their children because of how they are raised, it's intergenerational, and they really don't have any other methods of knowing of maybe how else they should approach the situation. Maybe they don't know the research about how this impacts children's well-being. Maybe they need more things in their toolkit. Maybe they normally do take away video games and all that other stuff, but they got really upset in a moment and they made a mistake, and maybe they don't want it to happen again. I know this can be uncomfortable situations for people, and maybe the parent will be upset, but I think most parents would rather, if there was a concern about their kid, that they hear about it from someone who they're connected to, who's connected to their kid, than a government agency. Help problem solve. So the common example that I get about this is, let's say that a 17-year-old said he had to sleep at a friend's house last night because mom or dad kicked them out, and now they were told they can never go back. I think historically, the first thing we'd do is to call CPS. A kid got kicked out. But I would encourage you to call mom or dad and say, hey, what happened last night? I heard you had to stay at so-and-so's house. And mom or dad might say, I didn't kick them out. I took away their phone and they left. And that is a common thing that I hear on the access line. Or mom says, or dad says, yeah, I am sick of them not following my rules. They can't come home. And then in that instance, let's say they can't come home, I would say that you should reach out to community programs. So calling, like in our area, I know there's some people not, calling Briar Patch, seeing if they can stay at Briar Patch, and then calling us, because then you've put the solution in place, and then you're calling us, and you've already connected them to resources. Maybe we can get them started in counseling right away. Other examples, I once had a grandfather call me and said, my daughter has left. I have no idea where she is. She's very young. She left me with this baby that I can't take care of. His wife had a medical, like a continuous medical problem that she needed help with. He had to work. There was no childcare that they had. So I talked him through how to gain guardianship, that he didn't need CPS. And he did it. He followed all of my steps. And that day, his granddaughter was not placed into foster care. Instead, he got emergency guardianship of his granddaughter. And we were able to keep CPS out of it. And a child was with family instead of a foster care family. That's how it should be. That's the type of rethinking our mindset that I'm talking about. And I'll do one more just because they're fun. So we had a kid who had possibly a UTI, and school staff had talked to her multiple times. You need to take this kid to the doctor. Mom wasn't taking him to the doctor. It's unclear why. I often find in cases of neglect that there is some type of unmet need, and we just have to figure out what that root of the cause is. What is the unmet need? Lisa and I have worked for families and children for years. We've never met a parent who doesn't love their kids. And they just need some help or direction and how to do things sometimes. And it turned out with this case with the UTI, the parent was worried about medical costs, and we figured out a way to do the medical costs, and then the kid went to the doctor. I mean, this is what I'm talking about, creating a social net around the family and really being creative, and the kids' needs are met, they're safe. That's the most important thing. I really want to make sure we have time for questions. So I have frequently asked questions that I normally go over. Maybe I'll do that quick because you've had a lot of questions today. So calling a parent makes the parent know that you made a CPS report. Yes, it's very likely that they will know, but oftentimes the jig is already up. All the parent has to do is ask the kid, who'd you tell this? And they'll say, I told so-and-so, and then they know. Will this ruin your relationship? Will they be mad? Yes, that's absolutely possible. But they might also be mad if you don't talk to them about it and call CPS. And let's just frame this in another way. Are they mad or are they scared? The next question I often hear is, I don't have time to be a mandated supporter. Labor shortage is happening in all industries. This is 100% true. People have more on their plate, less time on their hands every day. But let's reframe this. If you do a consult or you call the parent, you might save yourself those 20 to 45 minutes I was talking about, making a CPS report, and the family's needs are met. That could save you time in the long run. And we'll do some questions. And now Bethany will be here very soon. You will get a copy of our slides, and we have resources on there as well.
Oh boy, okay.
There are a ton of questions in there. I've been trying to take some of them and answer some of them. And I think that a really simple way to kind of like put together everything is say that like the purpose of this was specifically about child protection. I saw that as a question. Child protection and elder abuse services are different. They're separate. And so you got to find another training about abuse. This was not it. Sorry, y'all. So for those who are interested in that, we don't have it. For those who had questions about abolish CPS, about race and disability and all of those things, please understand that as social workers, we all individually hold a responsibility to understand those things, not just within CPS, but in any system that you are working in. There is no system in social work or that social work touch that is not oppressive. So please do not think that, please do your research, please know, please learn from folks who have experienced that with lived experience, and please don't think that you are somehow immune or set aside from that. If you call yourself a social worker, myself included, you are a part of the problem, and we all have work to do all the time. It is our responsibility. I will also say that as someone who works with agencies across the country, specifically doing child welfare, Dane County is one of the few talking about mandated support, and even there are whole states in this country where you are not allowed to train anything about anti-racism, race. It is very much, you can't say anything that would make people uncomfortable. So I often sit in front of hundreds of folks in this space telling them, hey, y'all have a problem, but I can't say what it is. They got to go and figure it out because that's how restrictive it is. So when we talk about abolish CPS, yes, that is great, but we are not even there yet. Like, understand what is happening across this country, and start like taking these steps and doing the work to understand those things and actually address them, because you cannot talk about like abolishing CPS or changing CPS or even mandated supporting without really understanding all of the barriers, blockades, laws that are going into effect that are impeding on the ability to even do these very simple things that we all can do. And then finally, I think the purpose of this, right, is critical thinking. If that is what you are tasked to do as a social worker, is to think critically, and not be reactive and just hope that somebody else will do something. We all actually have a responsibility to actually be supporters of everyone in our community, because we are one community. No matter how much we try to fight it, like we have to be in community with each other. And so in that way, we all are deserving and worthy of having that and being able to live in it safely. And so whenever you are considering any of this and you're thinking back and watching this presentation, think about that. Like, what are you doing to be critical of what it is you are being tasked to do? Because let's just put it out there, some laws are unjust, but they are still there. So what are you doing around that to be supportive and be in community with people and have an impact? And so with all that, I hope to welcome you all back. I want to thank Lisa and Tess for their time and valuable information today. I want to thank you all for being in attendance and being a part of this event. Please watch for an email with a link to an evaluation for today's conference. And there will be a separate email. I answered several questions about this. There is going to be a separate email regarding CEUs for those that requested them. So if when you registered, you requested them, you will get those CEUs. You don't have to do any further actions. They will come to you. This presentation, the recording and slides will be on the conference website soon after the conference, so please look out for that. And again, we hope to see you next week on February 3rd for part 2 of this conference. And with that, we will end, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day.